Hi, I'm Raul T. Pereira, and I'm with RTP Learning.
And I'm Norma Marquez, founder and CEO of Speak To.
And today we're going to talk to you about how to address Latina pay equity. And we want to go ahead and begin this conversation with the importance of looking at a data-driven approach to doing diversity, equity, and inclusion, because you really need to look at an audit process, right? That really looks at pay equity, for example. So one of the type of data that you need to collect would be stuff like demographics, like who are your people? Who are the ones that are currently working in your organization? And looking at where are they in terms of promotions, senior leadership roles. And most importantly, it's going to help you look at where do you need to recruit. So collecting that kind of data will really inform your approach to DEI or to any change effort, right? So if we look at of understanding where people are and what roles or what gaps exist, that's going to really give you some insightful information. Another area that I want you to consider is looking at their levels of engagement, how people feel connected to your organization. Do they feel like they are proud? Are they satisfied? Are they emotionally involved and feel like they are part of something bigger than who they are? And that's what you want to do. That's where you want to go. And you also want to look at levels of inclusion, right? Do people feel like they belong? Do they feel like their supervisor has their back, has their support? Do people feel like they are contributing to the mission, like they understand that their job really contributes to advancing the mission or even the business objectives of your organization? So when you do a survey, or you collect that kind of data, that's the kind of data I'm talking about. Like, for example, demographics, what does your diversity look like? Levels of inclusion, levels of engagement. And then today, we really want to jump into what pay looks like. What are some pay equity issues that we should probably look out for? Because at the end of the day, we want to have a high level picture of your organization on multiple points. And this will help inform your strategy. And what I want you to think about when you're formulating your strategy to your HR or your DEI initiatives is 4 big questions. Number 1 would be, where are you now, right? Where are you now? What's the picture look like? Where do you want to go? Number 2, where do you want to go? And number 3, how will you get there? That's going to be your action steps, right? And finally, number 4 is going to be, how will you know when you arrived? In other words, how would you measure success? And I think that's why it's so important, Norma, right, as you agree, that we start with an audit. And the audit needs to look at, will also reveal your quick wins. Your audit will look at, you know what? We do have some pay equity issues. We have men and women performing the same type of job, but they're not being paid the same. So you can make those quick adjustments right there and then. So your DEI audit, I'm suggesting, is a very fundamental step to begin any initiative and to make those corrections, right? Because as I said earlier, you want to have those quick wins. You want to create momentum in your change efforts. You want to be able to talk to your senior leaders and your management staff and say, hey, we've gone through this audit process. We looked at levels of inclusion, levels of engagement. We looked at demographics, and we looked at pay analysis and pay equity issues. And this is what the data is revealing. And now these are some of the small wins. Here are some adjustments that we're actually making. And now we're going to embark in this bigger strategic approach to improve our to equity, and inclusion in our organization. So that's like the big picture there. And I want to now move on to Norma, because there's a reality check, right? Pay equity for Latinas in the workplace. So I want to talk about that. So Norma, can you talk to us about pay equity issues in the workplace for our Latina sisters?
Absolutely, and Raul, thank you for inviting me to have such an important conversation when it comes to our Latinas and what we represent in the corporate environment. And one of the things that I learned early on is that culturally, as Latinas, we're being taught to say, "Calladita te ves más bonita," which means the quieter you are, the prettier you look, right? And so sometimes when we go into a corporate environment and get a job, we don't negotiate, right? We oftentimes say, we're going to prove ourselves. And once we prove ourselves, the money will follow, right? Or that's what we've been taught culturally, right? Trabaja duro, mija. It's gonna pay off. But in reality, when you look at pay equity and women in general, I'm gonna give you the big overview of where we are as women. Women make 83 cents to the dollar, and white male makes for the same role in corporate America. And the inequalities, the gaps are even bigger when it comes to women of color. When you're speaking about African Americans, they make 64 cents to the dollar that a white male makes in the same role. When it comes to Latinas, we make 57 cents to the dollar. So that means that it is 43 cents that we're leaving behind because we're either not negotiating or they don't see our value in corporate America, right? So how do we have those conversations? How do we make sure that we are addressing the inequalities that represent our Latinas in corporate America? And I would say that one of those things is that we need to know our value. We need to know our value when we apply for roles, and we need to know that based on the experience in the market, and then we need to not take the first offer and negotiate that, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted to give you an example of one of the things that we've identified through our tool is that Latinas oftentimes don't negotiate, and then there's still hiring, biases that take place, right? So the corporations are always going to try to save the dollar for the top talent. And one of the situations that we had this software developer that was coming in, a female, and they were asking, "Are you okay with that $90,000 salary range or salary?" And she said yes. And there was a male that came in and same role, and they asked him, and he said, "No, I want 120,000 for the role." Well, there was an assessment that was done to see where they were on their skills. And she was actually a software developer level 3, and the male was a level 2. And so just keep in mind, right? She came in and she said, "No, I'm okay with $90,000. And, the experience really didn't matter. She just wanted the job." When the recruiter went back to that individual, that female applicant, they offered her $150,000 because her skill levels was a lot higher than the male. And you would have thought that she was going to be jumping, up and down from, happiness about getting more money. Her reaction was, "Why so much?"
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Instead of jumping right up and down saying, "Well, I got more than what I expected," her reaction was, "Why so much?" And so why so much? Because you are value, right? And so we need to know our value, and we need to make sure that we address that.
Let me ask you this. So that's very interesting. But what happens in the case what if there was not an assessment?
Well, then we definitely need to look at a market, right? We need to look at jobs that are similar with companies across our market. And you would identify, that's the thing, is that the salaries are there, right? And more, before it was like a hush thing. Don't say your salary, don't talk about your salary. But we found out with some of the generations that are in the workplace now, they disclose their salary.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very open and they're honest about disclosing that. So you can always go to some of the sites and find out what the salary range is for it.
Even now, like in California, right? And I believe in the East Coast in New York, and there's places where there's a salary transparency laws in place. So there's really no excuse that for an individual that they can do their homework, right? And
Absolutely,
look at
absolutely.
comparables. Okay.
And the other thing too is that, I guarantee you that the company that's offering you the job, there's more money in that
Mm-hmm.
budget,
There
right?
always is. Yeah.
So there's always an opportunity to ask for more and to know exactly where you fall in that uh,
Yeah. And
bracket.
and I can attest as many years in human resources, I was always looking, I'm guilty, looking at the where can I save money? Can I offer this candidate the lower end of the range that we have? Of course, we didn't disclose that range, but if they took my first offer, I'll be like, yes, right. And I didn't even this is years ago, right? I didn't even consider the impact of that. I was just, my
Happy.
alliance, like happy. My alliance was with the organization. It's like, yep, all right. We offered them 60,000. That's the bottom of our range. They said yes. Let's you send out the official offer letter really quick. Have them sign them, bring them on board, and then we're done. We move on to the next candidate. But as an HR pro, right, as a recruiter, or at least somebody who's working with the organization, we have to adjust that attitude, right? We have to look at value, what the job is worth, and be honest about that stuff and be able to meet our candidates and take their responses, what they have to say about value. So tell us a little bit more.
It's interesting that we would do that when we buy in a house, a car, right? We go and ask
Oh, yeah.
the people, what is it worth to you? Or what do you think about the price?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't ask about the salary. And that is the critical component of how we live, right?
Mm-hmm.
How well we can do in the
That's
marketplace,
true.
right? And so those are critical things. So what kind of data? I would say there is a lot of data out there. Again, some of the sites that offer salary ranges, and a lot of the staffing firms offer that, reporting too, that you can go and find. And listen, you can always find somebody inside the company that can give you a salary range. The only thing is that if you take the lower end of the salary, guess what? You're always going to be on the lower end.
Mm-hmm.
Because even when you get a performance evaluation and you get a little bit of a salary increase, it's always going to be on the lower end, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, do you want to be on the lower end or do you want to be in the higher end? And one time I was speaking to a recruiter and she says, I couldn't disclose, just like you said, Raul, I couldn't disclose the salary range, right? But I always ask them, make sure you look at the market and what we pay, right? So it was kind of like a hint.
That's a code
You can
for,
come back and ask me.
So that would be like, I know we're not talking about tips yet, but that would be like your first tip. When a recruiter tells you, hey, maybe you should look at the market, the code is, hey, look at the market, come back
There's more.
higher. There's more. Awesome. Okay. Keep going. I feel like I'm interrupting you, but I know you have a lot more to offer.
Yeah. So, when we look at data, I think even what my advice would be from corporations, right? There's a lot of data and a lot of data points. And as you mentioned, Raul, we need to know where we've been in order to know where we're going and whether we are, delivering on that expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So for a corporate standpoint is that how are you analyzing that data? How are you making sure that there's not any pay inequalities within your workforce? But also, how do you make sure that there's no biases in the recruiting process, right? Because I might hire Norma today and I might give her $10,000 less than Raul, right? So why is that? Why is that happening? And asking those questions from a hiring manager perspective. What I also like to point out through our tool, what we found is that not only the Latinas are starting to get less money when they enter a corporate job, when it came to promotions, they were getting 1.5% in average on the salary on the promotions. The non-Latinas, they were getting 30% increases. So why is that? Why is that even a?
Can you repeat that number? Is it 1% less, or you said 30? You said something about 30%.
They were getting a 1.5% salary increase versus a 30% salary increase that the non-Latinas were getting when they got promoted.
So we're talking about a 28.5, or is that 29? No, 28.5% difference. That's pretty amazing. Okay.
So when you talk about data, we know that women can always multitask and they work in collaboration and they're always looking for how do I make sure that I make an impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things is that when you have women in your corporate environment, they're more likely to stay if they feel that they are being appreciated and that they were compensated fairly for the work that they do, right? So they tend to stay a little bit longer. And that also, applies to our tool, looking at how long have they stayed? What is the upper mobility of our Latinas in corporate America? I was working with an organization and they were telling me, there's companies that come into us saying, oh, can you upskill the Latinas? Because we need them for certain roles. And they were upskilling them. They were giving them the tools to be successful. But guess what was happening, Raul? They were getting promoted, but their salaries weren't going in alignment with that promotion.
Okay, so let me recap. So you're saying that, for example, an organization might come to you, for example, and say, "Hey, we need support in upskilling the Latina workforce because we want them to take on more responsibilities and to thrive in a particular role, for example, in leadership." Okay, so we're saying yes, and then we move through that process, and now they gone through training, they got through upskills, and now they're performing more work, bringing in more value for the organization. Yet the promotional
They weren't
money,
getting the
right,
pay.
raise wasn't there. Now that's an issue right there because that's really taking advantage of people, taking advantage
Absolutely.
of, and you see that all the time. I totally get it with an organization, you're trying to save money, but at the same time, it goes back to your point, Norma, about what the job worth and value is, right? And it's also for employers. Like, you need to be able to say, if we want to put in Norma, for example, and upskill her and support her and elevate her into a new role or expand her job, then you need to treat people fairly and compensate them accordingly. Wow, what a trip. So that's an important point that I wanted to make sure we highlight. So can you continue to talk to us about that experience?
Yeah, and so this wasn't necessarily our organization, but it was an organization that was offering that
Mm-hmm.
specific upskilling. And so they came to us saying, why don't we think about how do we partner with you and your tool and begin to have a baseline of where my Latinas come in before the training
Mm-hmm.
and where they end up after the training, and really going back to the organizations and saying, we're holding you accountable to making sure that our Latinas, when they get the skills that they need to be successful, that they're also compensated to the market value,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that impacts retention. If you think about it, that impacts attraction of Latinas. And you know that we like to share information. So, if you're really trying to cultivate a diverse workforce where, Latinas are part of that diversity initiative, then you need to look and you need to look at how are you positioning them and what are you offering them as a benefit or salary. The other thing is, how long are they staying with the company, right? Because if you think about it, the cost of recruiting an individual is very high, right? So how do you make sure that that individual not only stays, but they feel value to the point that they want to stay longer, or they want to bring other Latinas
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
into the corporations. So one of the things that we developed through our tool is a fair pay certification. So we know a lot of organizations are already driving those conversations internally, and some of them don't want to even see it, right? Because there is a responsibility. If you see something, you gotta address it and you gotta, fix it.
It's like you peel an onion and you kind of have to be able to chop it up and
Absolutely. So we understand what are the risk of associated with peeling the onion,
mm-hmm.
but what if you don't do it?
Mm-hmm.
What if you don't do it and the legal risk is a civil suit, right? Because they come together and they say we're getting paid inequitably. So now we want our compensation. So, there is risk either way, but I would say that the risk is you might lose them and they might not come back. And so if you're looking at the market, even at the market right now, what is it with the Latino community represents a $2.8 trillion of spend in the US,
mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
market is huge. So why not have the Latinos to give you insights into how to position your companies within this demographic? So that comes with having the loyalty from the Latinas coming into the place, paying them fairly, and then the ability to give them to upskill. One of the things that I love about the tool, Raul, that we provide is that the fact that you can see how long each ethnicity or gender stays within the company, within a role. And, you, at that point, you begin to ask, you talk about, how am I going to get there? Right. And you talk about, well, if this certain demographic, they only stay with the company for a year and a half, what are we doing wrong? Right? Really, what are we doing wrong? Is it simply pay equity? And sometimes it's not. It's policy, right? Is that training in D&I space? So how do I partner with individuals like Raul to come in and address some of those inequalities from a different angle, right? Because pay equity might be one, but there might be other underlying things that need to be addressed. And that's where you bring the expertise of Raul to come in and kind of help them identify how to really drive the solution to close those gaps.
Let me interject really quick, but you're making that connection to our opening, right? Where you are assessing as an organization, as a leader, CEO, or as a company, you start with an audit, right? You look at various factors because it's not just about pay, although pay is very important. Pay equity is important, but there can be other factors involved, right? So we need to have this holistic approach or this broader approach that can help inform what we need to do. What kind of action and policy changes do we need to do as a company, right? To make sure we not only attract, but retain Latinas, right? You made the argument that, yes, we are a massive market in the US. So having loyalty and engaged, happy employees and paying them what they're worth is probably a good idea to support your organizational performance, to support happy employees and healthy workplaces, because it does take a lot of money to recruit, to retrain somebody for that role. So can you tell us a little bit more, maybe, or do you have anything else to talk about the tool, this technology that you use that can be helpful for employers?
You know what? Yes. So the fact that our tool can give you insight analytics into the workforce, right? Because you want to always have a pulse check of where we are. And more than anything, where are they living, right? What does the retention look like from a certain demographic? And what is the upper mobility? Where are the opportunities for us to upskill some individuals? But, we also, you mentioned California early on and how California has the Fair Pay Transparency Act. But also it's mandated that any employer that has 100 employees or more in California has to report, right? Has to submit the EEO report.
Oh yeah, the EEO-1 report, yeah.
So our tool,
That's right.
allows you to see, to provide that report, in a few seconds.
Yeah.
And it gives you the visualization of where you are. So which is a key, right? A key driver to really understanding your data and knowing where you are. The one thing that we gotta remember, Raul, is that diverse companies, and I'm gonna go from a diversity angle, diverse companies outperform their competitors, right? Because of the innovation that takes place by having a diverse workforce, but also ties into some of the compliance environments. And we're seeing a lot of the conversations happening right now with the ESG. And so what we support is the social aspect, right?
Can you explain what ESG is?
Yes. So
that
ESG is a proposed regulatory and measuring scoring for companies, and is driven by social investors that are looking for how are companies being perceived in the market other than just products and services. So where we have, corporate social responsibility in the past, where it was like a branding awareness, and we're doing good in the community, and we're doing things, and we're serving the community. What we're looking at, the investors are looking at the environment. How are companies producing things that impact the environment and how are they protecting the environment, but also how do they refurbishing things back into the environment. So very sustainable environment and greenhouse initiatives. So there's a lot of measures that take place there, from scope one, where it's direct, waste, to indirect waste of the products or the, services you provide. And then you got other, types of scopes.
Mm-hmm.
The social impact measures pay equity and human rights, human capital, right, within your organization, the diversity makeup of your workforce, the pay gaps or the pay ranges between your executive and your employees, right? Your diversity board makeup, which is so critical, again, right, to drive some of the innovation. So where our tool comes in is to support the S, the reporting on the S, and social impact, where it helps the companies really identify some of those gaps that are so critical. And then you have the governance, which has more on your company governance, your data privacy, and things like that, and the regulatory environment. So those are the things that are being proposed, and the SEC, Security Exchange Commission, is actually the one driving this specific initiative. And again, it's driven by investors, and we know that a lot of the companies need that investment to either grow or expand or get technology. So it is critical for companies to really take a deep dive into inequality. Is not just, it is for Latinas because we're in the bottom of that pay rate, but it encompasses everything that has to do with the diversity and inclusion initiatives within your company.
Yeah, I was not aware about the Security Exchange Commission and the mandates. That's really, it's unfolding. Do you foresee like how soon in the future will this start to kind of unfold, and what kind of impact will, or what are the companies, or like size of companies, like 50 or more, 100 or more employees? Like, what are we talking about here? Do you know?
Any company that is publicly owned would have to adhere to those regulatories.
Privately traded, right? So the ones
Yep.
so it's privately owned, privately traded. Wow. Okay. So that's really great. So you're pretty much, your company and the tool you've developed is really ahead of the curve, right? It will be able to address, or at least be able to help organizations identify pay equity issues from the C-suite all the way down to the frontline staff. Is that did I conceptualize
Absolutely.
that? Okay.
And it's and the one thing is that that's in a very unique way, right? And real fast, so it's very timely, right? And one of the things that I can tell you, Raul, when it comes to pay equity, and again, I'm gonna say it, Latinas are at the bottom of that pay, but we also measured pay equity when it comes to, or individuals on the non-binary side, individuals with disabilities, and veterans. It is critical for us to look at the intersectionality of our workforce and where there might be some gaps. Again, we're looking at skills, but it all begins with the conversation of where they come in and where are you taking them once they begin the journey with the company.
Can you talk for a moment on just a kind of high level practical way? For example, like, say I engage with you in an agreement or a contract to help me analyze my workforce. So is the idea that I give you a CSV file or a data file, dump it in to your tool, and then it spits out these awesome reports? Can you walk me through, like, just from a practical sense, like, if I'm to work with you, what do I need to do as an employer? What data do you need, and what will come out on the other side?
Yes. So one of the things that we know is privacy is key, right? And a lot of the companies protect their privacy and the data. We designed a tool where we don't take personal identifiers.
Okay.
We simply look at titles and salaries and locations where the individual might work. And then, gender and age, because we want to look at demographics as well. We look at generations and where they are in the workforce. And so, yeah, it will be a CSV file that you can input into the system, and then within less than 2 minutes, you get a nice report with visualizations, reporting, and you can break it down by region,
Ethnicity
functional
too, right?
area.
EEO1
You can compare.
classifications as well. Like so I would be able to
Absolutely.
see
Absolutely.
male, female, gender, race, differences there, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so one of the things is that you get that, or we can actually be, we can sit on top of your payroll
Mm-hmm.
system, and that report will be pulled from our system.
Oh, got it.
And one of the things is that, we know that as much as we want to have an accuracy and data, that there's still missing fields. And so a report allows you to see the level of accuracy based on number of fields that are missing. So you could always say, my data is 85%, accurate. But again, a lot of organizations are doing some of this already in-house, and those have the tools. But then there's a lot of companies out there that need to get into that environment, and they just don't know how, right? And so that's the companies that we want to support, those that are very intentional and they want to really compliant, and so that we work with them very closely. I think that one of the things that we're doing is the fair pay certificate that allows the companies to pull their own report, and then we will validate, and not only validate, we will ask them to create a strategic map, to your point, Raul, about how are you going to address those inequalities or those gaps, and how are you going to drive it. So we focus on people, data, and impact, right? Let's look at our people, let's look at our data, and we might have some gaps. How do we truly, truly drive impact? Can you imagine if I can go to a company and I can see that they have a badge where it says fair pay certified? That to me shows that you value me, and then I want to work with you, right?
So let's if we shift gears a little bit, if I'm an HR pro, or HR manager or director for a company, what are some things I should be thinking about, or questions I should, or points that I need to consider to talk to senior leadership? Like, what are some sound bites? Like, give me a way to, do I Google a particular phrase or skill set or something that I need to equip myself with more information, and how to begin to have these conversations with senior leaderships that we should, in fact, as an organization, begin to tackle some of these pay equity issues? Like, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say, you know what? Once you get the report and you can share your findings, I think that the data doesn't lie, right? The data always tells you a story. So it is critical for senior level executives to see it. I was working with an organization, and they say, well, we don't have a diversity problem. And so when we look at the first line of employees, they were all diverse. But in the top level, there was no diversity, not even from a gender perspective, right? So sometimes you kind of had to see that, and they see it, but they don't realize, right? And so, they don't want to acknowledge that there's a gap. And one of the things that, we saw is that there was a team within an organization, and everybody in that team looked the same, and they were the same age. So now the conversation is, how do we support that manager to think differently? Because they might not know, right? How do we address those gaps? And Raul, that's where you come in with your expertise, right?
You talk about
Can I come in
biases.
and can I tell you what the value will be? There might be biases, right? Everybody in my team looks like me because I trust only me. And I want everybody to listen to me.
Of course.
And I don't want anybody to say, no, challenge me, right? So, and when it comes to pay, are you doing exit interviews, right? And then what are those exit interviews saying? And you're looking at retention. What is that saying about your organization? Who's staying the longest? And you look at salaries, and you say, maybe there was a gap in the salaries, and they found out, and then they just decided to leave. And what we found, Raul, and was very interesting, is that a lot of the individuals, and I will be interesting to see if any companies have done a study. There were people that have been with the company for a very long time, and they weren't getting paid, and to the level.
Mm-hmm.
They left the organization, and the organization struggled for a few months finding the replacement. They came back, and at that point, they made a lot more money.
I've seen that happen.
So how much are we willing to sacrifice from a knowledge perspective, right? Because you got companies that have people, employees, probably 10, 15 years, if any.
That's valuable. Mm-hmm.
That is valuable, right? That is very valuable when it comes to knowledge and expertise. So I'm sure that, even that can lead to a conversation. They're leaving and they're coming back, and we're offering them twice as much.
And
that is an interesting conversation.
And the organization could have avoided all of that drama and just elevated people and pay them fairly, right? We're talking about pay equity, and we're talking about being proactive and not reactive. I do want to make a quick point that although exit interviews are very, very important, that you should consider doing exit interviews. But at that point, guess what? It's too late. It's an exit. The people are leaving. It's going to tell you stuff that you missed. And what Norma is suggesting is, let's pause. Let's go through an analysis and dump our pay data and our demographics data into your tool and look at what the gaps are and be reactive. Do the changes now that will support employee engagement, that will support people being loyal to the organization. And ultimately, it's about retention, right? I tell everybody that think about DEI, very simple terms: recruitment and retention. And part of what you're doing, Norma, or the tool and the technology that you're involved with does both, right? Because you're able to create a picture where people are happy. Once you correct your equality, your equity issues, you will have a reputation for being someone who pays Latinas and other ethnic minorities or marginalized communities fairly. So that's good for recruitment, right? And the retention side, of course, we all know that retention really matters to drive organizational performance.
Not only that, imagine if you have those town hall meetings and you're talking about being transparent,
mm-hmm.
and then saying, we're not there yet, but we're striving. We're constantly looking at it. We have a pulse on it. What it means to me is, you know what? I matter.
They care. Mm-hmm.
And therefore, as long as you're being transparent and honest, I know that sooner or later you'll fix it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But don't talk the talk and not walk the walk, right?
That's so
you
true.
gotta show some momentum. You gotta show some credibility. And what happens sometimes is that, in organizations, you get CEOs that come in and they stay for 2-3 years and they leave. Mm. And what happens to the initiative? Mm-hmm. Right. So this is something, to your point, is very critical, right? When we look at attraction and retention and retaining that knowledge, right? That mm-hmm. helps us or positions our brand with other competitors. Mm-hmm. And so it's critical for us to always look at people. So, it's very important for us as Latinas to know where we are when it comes to pay inequity. And so one of the things is that I have a call to action to all my Latinas. And so it all begins where, how do we look for a job, right? And before we look for a job, do we look at market analysis? And then we look at where our salaries are based on our expertise. And and how do we apply for that job? And, sometimes we go in there and say, what if I put a salary range and they don't call me because it's out of my salary range? Well, what if they call you and they tell you can't negotiate? Right? So that's the question you gotta ask. So I would always caution you to look at the salaries in the market and look at the application process. The other thing is, always make sure that you have good letters of recommendation, right?
Mhm.
And when you go into the interview process, let them tell you what the salary is, knowing that you can always ask for more. Like Raul said, there probably be another gap. And so my question to you is, a lot of the Latinos that I speak to, they said, well, they offered me the job and I didn't want to go back and negotiate because they might rescind my job, or they might take it back, or they might say no. How do you know that? You were already selected, right? You're the top candidate. They already offered you the job. So your job is to go in there and negotiate and ask for a little bit more. And I always ask Raul, individuals, you're gonna go and ask, and you're gonna need to really say why you deserve more, right? Because that's the critical discussions. Why do I deserve extra dollars? And then have the sincere conversation with yourself. And I always say practice. And what if they say no, we can't meet it? What is going to be your reaction, right? Do you still want to take that job? Or if they say, well, we're going to go back and see if how much more we can offer you, that's fine, right? But I always say, when the interview process comes and you get a job offer and you get the salary, you can always go back and say, you know what, I'm excited about this opportunity. When it comes to the compensation, we're pretty much where I need to be. And that gives the HR executive a hint that you're about to go and negotiate, right? And so they can be prepared to kind of offer before you go and ask, or they want to set up a meeting to see what you have to say. The thing is, with Latinas, and I think a lot of women in general, is that we take the job offer and we always go down the checklist and we say, oh my God, it's a great company. It's great culture. Oh my God, my manager role is going to be amazing. I just think that I'm going to grow so much with him because he said he focused on my development, and I got flex work schedule. I can work from home. They have great healthcare benefits. We look at all the other boxes, and then last one we checked is the salary. So what I want to do is encourage my Latinas and other women that are listening to put that salary on the top of the conversation, and the rest of it will take care of itself. Because you got to take care of you. Because what if you take the job and, Latinas are always like, ay, pues lo tomo que acabo, pago los biles con eso. What if you are struggling one time and you stress out and you can't perform? You are worth just as much as men are worth. And I gotta tell you, at the beginning of last year, we were at 57 cents for a dollar that a male makes in that same role. It dropped to 54 cents. Can we afford continue to drop just because we're not willing to negotiate? And the impact that it's going to have in future generation Latinas that enter the workplace, we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to all the Latinas. And it's a great way to pay it forward, right? Oftentimes here, women are, invited to the table, have a seat at the table. But do we have a voice at that table? And do we advocate for one another? Do we really create the allyship? Do we sponsor all the Latinas? Do we speak on behalf of many other Latinas that are coming to similar roles than you are? When it comes to promotional opportunities, Raul, I tell you, when I looked at that data, it was frightening, right? And I couldn't understand why my Latinas were getting only 1.5% increase in that specific company, where other Latinas were getting 30% increases. Why? Do we not have a sponsor within our own corporations? Are we upskilling? But then again, they don't see our value, or they want to just put us another lateral move and move us out and just reshuffle us to another role just to say that we're upskilling the Latinas, right? So that's a great conversation again to level set and say, you know what, you offer me that promotion, but it's not where it needs to be. Not only that I invested my time in the company, but I also invested my time in upskilling my skills or acquiring different skills to perform in this role. So I think that my time is valuable, and therefore it should be compensated to that value. Always advocate for yourselves. Look at the market. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Look at those salaries in the market. And if you have individuals like Raul on your side, ask them, you know, how do you think I should approach the conversations?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I look at market? And how do I analyze salaries? And what do you think my salary band will be, right, for the specific role? Because I'm sure, Raul, you got a lot of good tips in terms of what are some of the roles they have a wider salary band
Yeah, for
than
sure.
others.
Yeah. And, I think since I've been on the other side in terms of, in-house human resources, um, when somebody says, I like the way you said it, Norma. You said that it's, thanks for the promotion. I really appreciate you considering this. I am so excited about this new opportunity. The salary's not quite where it's supposed to be, or the salary's not quite where it needs to be. That is non-confrontational. That, as an HR person, when I hear that, I will write down and just say, okay, so that invites me and to ask you the question. Okay, Norma, so can you give me a range, or where do you think the salary should be? And then you're going to come back and say, Raul, well, I think the salary needs to be 10% higher, or I think I will be very comfortable with a salary. You're offering me $60,000. I want to, I think that's a generous offer. In order for me to accept this, I would be more comfortable at 68,500 and above. So now you have an anchor, right? You have in psychology, right? You have a number, 68,500. You can say $68,522. And they might think, oh, shoot, how did Norma come up with that $68,522? Like, oh, she did her homework, right? But I'm writing it down as the HR person, and then I'm looking at it. And if I already have a range in mind, 60 to 70,000, I can be like this, I can kind of like, oh, okay, let me think about it. Hold on, Norma. Oh, wait, let me bring out my calculator. You know what? I think we can make that work, knowing very well that I know I can make it work, but I have to play that little dance, right? I'd be like, okay, but if I cannot, if I don't have the authority, quote unquote, or if I don't know, I can say, okay, well, Norma, let me consider this. Let me talk to the director. Let me talk to the division head, and I'll be in touch with you by tomorrow and see where we're at. Okay. So then then I can go back and say, Norma said she wanted to take the position. She's super excited. I think she'll be great. She wants to be at 68, I'll probably bat for her. Say she wants to be at 69,000, right around there. Oh, Raul. But guess what? I'm having that conversation. I'm advocating now for Norma, just like I would advocate for anybody else. So I'm talking to leadership about how great you are and how willing you are. And as an HR pro, how it would be in our best interest to bring her up to that level instead of starting over, right? Because as we know, the cost of recruitment and retention is high. So it's like, wow, we are having that conversation, and now I'm suddenly in the ally role for this individual, and I'm batting for them, and it's still reasonable. It's still within the range or whatever it is. But if you don't say anything, guess what? I'm going to be a one-way conversation. I'm going to say, okay, $60,000. You're going to say yes. And then guess what? I'm going to say, all right, $60,000 versus you saying, if you already have a range in mind, now we're having a conversation. Nothing wrong with that. It happens all the time. It's totally normal. I think one of the things that you talked about, Norma, is for our Latina sisters is working on confidence, right? Working on those skills to have the confidence in order to have those uncomfortable conversations. We might think yes, they are uncomfortable, but if you do your homework and if you practice, guess what? It becomes easier, right? You become an advocate for yourself. Very, very awesome. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of supporting our Latina sisters and how they can up their game in advocating for themselves?
You know what? I would say always get yourself a good sponsor within your organization
Mm-hmm.
or someone that can guide you through that process, right? Someone that can practice that with you. And don't go for the first offer. You know, I know Speak to You provides a lot of workforce insight analytics, but ultimately I want to encourage Latinas and women in general and I want to empower them to negotiate, right? There's only so much that corporations can do, but if we already put ourselves in the lower end of the salary when we come into our corporation, it's going to be very hard for us to close the gap. And so you had to make a choice. So I would encourage all of you. And you know what, Raul, I think at the end, I'll share my email address. If anyone wants to ever practice the negotiation, I'm more than open to sit with them and practice with them, right? And see how we can close that. So it does take a lot of courage to go and ask for more money because you know what, as Latinas, no preguntes, you don't ask, right? We've been taught not to ask. You have to prove yourself and then the reward will come. Well, guess what? We need to start asking because we're worth it.
That is so awesome. Thank you, Norma. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want to say thank you to Norma Marquez, your awesome insights, and you talked about the tool that you have developed. I do want to take a quick moment to recap. We started this conversation with this encouragement to do audit, right? In the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, we call this a DEI audit. And we are trying to gather data in its very simplistic form, get data, demographics, levels of inclusion, levels of engagement, and most importantly, levels of pay across all organization roles, from senior leadership all the way through frontline staff. And we have a tool, and that tool is for that Norma and her company use, Speak to. So that would be a great resource. Any last advice that you can give our Latina sisters or our companies? And then you can tell us how we can find you.
Absolutely. No, I just, again, I want to say if you have any questions or you need any tips on how to negotiate, I'm here. You can always reach out and I will do my best to guide you through that process. But ultimately is how do we have those conversations with companies also, right? Because we can influence the companies and say, when was the last time you did a pay equity audit, right? I have one individual that told me once when I was talking about our MVP for the tool, he says, well, people get paid what they deserve. And I said, yes, they do. But how long have you been in your role? And he said 15 years. I said, I bet you the person that's coming in is probably getting paid more than you are currently. So I said, so I would reconsider your comment. And what I would do is encourage others to make sure that they're looking at that pay, to make sure that we're not just, the servicing or Latinas or women in general, but also is how do we hold those managers accountable to making sure that they look at that data? And also having those conversations, Raul, that are so critical. Why are they all Latina in this team? Are you going to recruit more Latinas? Are you going to recruit more individuals of color to come into the team? Right? Having those conversations. We need more diversity because diversity creates innovation. Innovation creates more value in the market for companies. So that would be my advice. Challenge those managers, challenge those companies to think differently. Again, we represent a $2.8 trillion market. And so we have a voice, but we haven't used it in a very long time. So for us and Speak to You, if you want a complimentary assessment and you want to see where you are, we'll be more than happy to give you access to that tool so you can see where is your baseline so that Raul can help you identify where you go from there and how do you execute that plan for your organization. If you're looking for how do I put that fair pay or the EO1 report for California together, we'll be more than happy to give you access to that tool so you can see how quickly you can put that together. Same goes for the EO for the federal government. that's something that is in development right now, and it will give you access to expedite that report that we know is very tedious. So there's more capabilities being implemented into the tool. So you can always reach out to me at Norma at speak to you. I can't even say it. Norma at speak2.com. And we do have a website, it's speak2.com. So you can visit our site and you can request a quick demo or a complimentary free report. So you can see what our tool can provide to you as a workforce insights analytics.
So it's Norma at speak2.com, and then your website is speak2.com. And the word speak, for that speak, and then tu como tu in Spanish, speak to, is that so we can remember?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we wanted to make sure. I was lucky enough that I got an investor that believed in me and my passion to close that pay equity. Mm-hmm. And so he's the driving force behind the tool. I'm just the one that provides some of the guidance and what we like to see. But I want other women and other Latinas to be seen just the way he saw me, and he's investing in me. So I'm just half of the co-founder. And Matt Cheek is my other co-founder and a very strong supporter of not just Latinas, but women in general.
That is awesome. I want to thank you for your time, your expertise, your insight, your awesome energy and attitude and encouragement for our fellow Latina sisters to get that confidence, go after those promotions, don't take the first offer. So I just want to say thank you. And remember, speak2.com. So SPEAKTU.com, and Norma at speak2.com as well. Send her an email. She would love to hear from you. Again, Norma, it's good to see you. Estás en Mexico right now. Is it raining?
No, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's about 85 degrees.
Nice.
And so it's absolutely gorgeous.
Okay. I'm here in California and it's coming down late February. Thanks again. I really value your insight. I hope you have a great day, and we'll stay in touch and hopefully bring more valuable information to the public.
Absolutely. Thank you, Raul, for the opportunity to share the stage with you. And I hope that I hope that we have the opportunity to work together again.
Absolutely.
Soon.